As he looked up from the ditch, you could already tell that he knew it was too late. He should have listened to him. Everybody told him not to go down that road, not that time of day. You never know who might jump out from behind the corner and rob you. And here he laid in the bottom of a ditch, looking up through one swollen eye, so badly beaten that his mother wouldn't even recognize him. His head pounded like nothing before. In his mouth he tasted blood. His chest felt the searing pain of a blade he never saw, and his ribs were shattered to pieces. Every breath that sucked in, he thought it might be his last. This is Selma, Alabama, 1965. It's the heart of the civil rights movement. You could pierce the tension in the atmosphere with a dull clothespin. There's Martin Luther King traveling down there every other week to be a part of what's happening. There's so much tension at a boiling point, you don't know what's going to happen. Every week there's a riot here or a demonstration there. Every week there's a beating. Only this time it's a little different. This time the victim is different. This time the victim is a white man. Who jumped him? Nobody saw. They took off before anybody came, but here he was in the ditch, bruised and bleeding, half naked, left for dead. He looked up through that one almost swollen shut eye to see a form coming towards him, and he couldn't quite make it out until he came closer. He could tell it was a man. He was well dressed. He was carrying a Bible. As he came close, he reached out a feeble hand and writhing in pain, asked for help. And the man looked down at him and unexplainably walked away. And behind him, he saw somebody else coming in the distance, and he couldn't quite decipher who that was either. But as he came closer, he saw he's white. He looks like a church-going type. These are good signs for him. But as he came closer, he reached out again and cried a feeble cry for help, and still nothing. The man looked down. He saw him. He knew he saw him. And then he continued on his way. He sunk down a little deeper in the gutter and laid his head down for what he thought would probably be his final breath. Wondered what they'd say about him on the news that night, if he even made the news. And as he laid there, he felt some dust kick up on his back, and he couldn't quite tell, but it didn't seem like it was kicked in spite. It seemed like someone might be coming close. And as he started to look up, he was turned on his back, and a wet washcloth began to dab at his bruised and bleeding face. As he opened and peered through that almost swollen shut eye, he saw a man, and he thought, this white pastor has come back to save me. But when he opened it, he saw the skin of this man was dark. And his frail body jumped back in fear, somehow found the strength, because he's thinking to himself, there's no way a black man would save me, not here, not now. But as he jumped back, a gentle, reassuring hand was laid on him. He said, it's going to be all right. And with the strength of an ox, he picked him up. He laid him on his bicycle, draped him over the handlebars, and with one strong arm holding him on, and with the other strong arm, steered him all the way till they came to the doors of the Good Samaritan hospital there in Selma. You know, I think it's beautiful and fascinating that during this era, until the 80s, there was a hospital in Selma, Alabama, called the Good Samaritan Hospital. I think it's beautiful because that hospital overcame prejudices to treat whoever needed help, no matter what color their skin was. I think it's fascinating because that hospital carried with it the legacy and the meaning of what Jesus meant to convey in the parable of the Good Samaritan. If you've got your Bible with you, open it up to Luke chapter 10. That's where we're going to be this morning. Pull those sermon notes out. We're going to be using those. We've been walking through a series of parables this summer. Pastor Scott's been leading us. He's on vacation this week, and so you're stuck with me. And so we've been walking through these parables. We've been pretty much living out of Matthew chapter 13, this string of parables the last couple months. And I won't rehash all of them, but some of the parables we've looked at, we've seen as we've unlocked these keys, these mysteries of the kingdom. What we've seen is things like the mustard seed, that this kingdom of God grows up inside us like a mustard seed, which is so small, but grows into something so large. We've seen through the parable of the leaven and the yeast that God's kingdom, those who surrender to God, that it permeates every aspect of your life like yeast and leaven works through the whole batch of dough. That's how God's kingdom works in a life. It works through every element of your life, every relationship, every interaction. That's God's kingdom. Through a couple weeks ago, the parables of the priceless pearl and the hidden treasure, we discover that Jesus Christ is the most priceless treasure you will ever lay your hands on, you will ever embrace in your life. It's totally worth letting go of anything else, any other temptation, any other life, any other thing that might hold you back from Jesus. He is priceless. He's a treasure worth pursuing, worth giving anything up for. And then last week, Pastor Scott brought us into the parable of the dragnet, and we saw that at the end of the age, God is going to bring everyone to him before his judgment seat, everyone to him. And at that point, he's going to separate out those who have readily embraced his grace, who have thrown their hands up in surrender and said, God, I'm yours, from those who have stiff-armed him throughout their whole life. These are the parables of Jesus that we've been walking through. And this morning, we're going to jump ahead to Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10, verse 25 is where we're going to pick it up. But before we go too far, we need to ask God to just guide our time. And I said, because we're doing something just Orange Day for no reason in Catalyst, I said, I will highlight you people over here. Look at this lovely orange. Aren't they beautiful? Make some noise, Orange Day. Yeah. So, why? Just for fun. There's not really any reason. We're going to have lunch. If you got a teenager, stick around for lunch today. Bring an orange side dish. My wife is going to go to Panda Express, and you know what she's going to get? Yeah, not honey walnut shrimp. And so, I love you, Scott. I was totally joking. And so anyways, just a fun thing we're doing. So thanks for being here, crew. Let's pray. We're going to dive into God's word. Almighty God, it is so good to be in your presence and to open up your word and to see you speak into our lives today. And God, these are hard teachings. What you have to say to us today, we've got our quills up and we don't want to let you in. But God, I pray that you would let our guards down. And that you would speak to our hearts, our minds, our souls today. Reveal the things under the surface in our lives that aren't of you. The heart attitudes, the mindsets, the things that set us apart from you. God, be glorified through this preaching of your word in your name. Amen. As we catch up to Jesus here in Luke chapter 10, we see him out on the town. He's teaching out in the open as he would often do. And when you come to him, you see him interact with a lawyer, a legal expert. And we read in verse 25, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Well, what's written in the law? Jesus replied. How do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, you've answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. Now, I find it helpful as I'm reading the Bible to help me understand it. I ask questions of the text. Maybe you do this yourself, or I encourage you to do it when you're reading the Bible on your own. Just ask questions of the text if you're having a hard time understanding it, because it answers back. He talks back to us through it. So let me ask you two basic questions. Number one, who are the two main actors that you see in this scene? It's not a hard question. A little louder. Jesus and a lawyer, right? Jesus and a Jewish lawyer sounds like the start for a joke. Like Jesus and the Jewish lawyer meet in a bar. And I don't know, it just sounds like this weird setup, but there it is, okay? So Jesus and this Jewish lawyer. Now, let me ask you a second question. Why did the Jewish lawyer ask the question that he asked? Go ahead. To test him, right? See, I have a feeling this man isn't really interested in his response. I have a feeling he's not really looking to find out how he can have eternal life. He's already convinced himself that he's got it. He's looking to stump Jesus. And so he asks this question nonetheless. What must I do to inherit eternal life? And with all the skill of a boxer who's been beaten to a corner with one jab, he turns him around. That's what Jesus does. Puts the question back to him. He says, you're a smart guy. You tell me, how do you read the scriptures? What's it say? And the man, the lawyer, has a great answer. A great answer. He answers with what was called back then and still today as the great commandment. Love God and love others. Those are two fill-ins on your sermon notes. Love God and love others. He says, first off, you got to love God. He's answering from the Shema, Deuteronomy 6, verse 5. Every good Jewish boy and girl knew the Shema. They memorized the Shema as a kid. Some of my students over here are putting their pinkies up because they've been to Wildwood. They know the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Va'adhavta et Adonai b'kol levavka uv'kol nafshika uv'kol me'odeka, right? You didn't do all that. I know. Showed you up. And so that's the Shema. And every good Jewish boy and girl would know this. And they could recite it at the drop of a pen. So it's not surprising that he started out here saying, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, and your mind. Not a surprise at all. But he goes from there and he says, and love your neighbor as yourself, quoting Leviticus 19, verse 18. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, at first glance, this doesn't sound all that profound, does it? It just sounds like the golden rule. I mean, the golden rule is everywhere in our culture. It's not all that unique, is it? Every major religion has some form of the golden rule. As a matter of fact, I put some of them down in your sermon notes. Buddhism, you know, in your family, you say certain things a little funny sometimes. My wife calls it Buddhism. Not on purpose, either. It's just kind of funny. Buddhism. They say, hurt not others. She's totally going to kill me for that. Hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful. Confucius said, do not do to others what you don't want them to do to you. In the Hindu scriptures, the Mahabharata, we read, do not do to others what would cause pain if done to you. Islam's along the same lines. None of you truly believes until he wishes for his neighbor, his brother, what he wishes for himself. Believe it or not, even Satanists have a form of the golden rule. They say, do unto others as they've done to you. But typically it's used more to excuse reciprocating when people have treated you poorly. So watch yourselves. And so the golden rule is everywhere in our culture. It, on the surface, doesn't sound all that profound. Even last Sunday night, I'm laying my kids down for bed and we're reading the Berenstain Bears. Anybody ever read the Berenstain Bears? Yes, my people. And so we're reading the Berenstain Bears, and I realized that it's teaching the golden rule to my kids. It's Sister Bear's little locket. It says, treat others the way you want to be treated yourself. And these interactions on the playground, I'm teaching them the golden rule. See, on the surface, it doesn't sound all that profound, does it? Just the golden rule. But when you look a little deeper, you realize that God's teaching, the teaching of our scriptures, sets it apart in a couple very significant ways. Number one, our teaching is not negative, but it's positive. In essence, what I mean is, on your outline, you'll see all those quotes from other religions. They all say, do not do to others, do not do this, do not do that. It's phrased negatively, meaning don't do bad stuff. But the way he phrases it here is positive. He says, love others. And he doesn't stop with saying, be kind and do good. That's not enough. He takes it a step further. He says, love your neighbor as yourself. Love goes further than being nice and doing good. Love. And what you're going to find is that as you love others, it starts with your love for God. He phrases this that way on purpose. Love God, love others. It starts with loving God. Any other way you go is going to be selfishly motivated. It's going to be feeble and frail. But you start with loving God and you let that overflow into the love for others. Love God and love others. It affects every part of our lives, every relationship you're in. What you're going to find is if you have a lack of love for someone in your life, that's probably because you're lacking love for God in some way. It's hard to hear, but it's the truth. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. He says, listen, it's not enough to just love those that you're close to. It's not enough to love those that you like, that you're related to, those that you have to associate with. You got to love those that you don't agree with. You got to love those you don't understand, those that you don't want to associate with. You got to love them too. Here's where we see it. Verse 29, let's keep reading. And because this Jewish lawyer wanted to justify himself, didn't we tell you he's trying to stump Jesus? He's looking for a loophole. You know lawyers. And so he says, to justify himself, he says, and who exactly is my neighbor? Just who exactly are we talking about here? Like, not them over there, right? Clarify for me, Jesus. You can't mean everybody. And in reply, Jesus told him a story. Familiar story. Maybe you recognized it a few minutes ago. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and when he fell into the hands of robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, they beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. You see, this stretch that he's traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho was a treacherous, infamously treacherous journey. About a 17-mile stretch, descending sharply in elevation, and it goes through these rocky bluffs and crevices where anybody could be hiding at any moment. It was a treacherous road. So he's painting a very realistic picture, a very familiar picture for this lawyer. Read on, verse 31. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. A priest represents the people before God. He's the representative. He represents the people before God. A Levite is a special set-apart tribe that would go and minister in the temple. So in essence, you can kind of think pastor and deacon here. That's who these men are. If there's anyone who is going to come to his aid, it's the priest and the Levite, right? Right? But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him, had compassion on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds. He poured oil and wine on, and then he put the man on his own donkey. He brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii, which would cover him for about 2 weeks, and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. And then he asked a question, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus said, you go and do likewise. You know, when Jesus told this story for the first time, this was shocking. Absolutely shocking. They expected the priest or the Levite to come to the man's rescue. They're the heroes of the story, obviously, right? But not a Samaritan. No way. Unfortunately, this parable has become so familiar for us, we miss it. You see, he goes on, and we can so easily miss, if we're not looking at it, what Jesus was really going after is to say, listen, you got to get past your prejudices. You got to love everyone whose path you cross. That's his ultimate point. His ultimate point is that we should overcome prejudices and learn to love those that we're like the least, or that we like the least or are least like. It's not uncommon to hear this phrase today, the Good Samaritan, or a Good Samaritan pulled a man from a burning car on the nightly news. That's all fine, but what Jesus he's not really going for do good things and be nice. He's really trying to help us to see that we need to love others, especially those that we're least like or like the least. You see, in Jesus' day, nobody had ever heard of a Good Samaritan before. To the Jews, they're hated half-breeds. Nobody associated with them. You see, if you rewind the tape, back in the Old Testament, the nation of Israel broke into 2, and the northern kingdom chose Samaria as its capital. That's where the name comes from, Samaritan. And they would intermarry with other pagan nations, and so they were seen as being unfaithful to the nation of Israel. And as you go along in time, they look different. They talk different. They worshiped differently. They have different lifestyles. I wonder if you have people in your life like that who talk different, who look different, who have different lifestyles, who worship differently. And so here's the Jews and the Samaritans, and in this time, they didn't associate at all. And if you think I'm making this up, you can go over to John chapter 4, where you see Jesus walk into town one day. And he goes to a well, and his disciples go off for a bit to find some food to eat. And he's standing by this well, and he asks this woman, "May I have a drink?" And she says, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" And in case you were tempted to miss it, John gives us this pivotal parenthetical comment. He leans in and he says, "For Jews and Samaritans didn't associate with each other." See, that's what we're looking at here. Jews and Samaritans don't associate with one another at all. They have nothing in common so far as they can tell. And here's a Jewish rabbi talking to a Jewish lawyer, and a Samaritan is the hero of the story? Are you kidding me? That's like saying a Dodgers fan helped a Giant, or worse yet, like a Raiders fan helped anyone, this is completely unprecedented. It's never been seen before. This is a Samaritan is the hero. Are you serious? And the people that are supposed to help, the people that are the heroes, the priests and the Levite, they ran away? Whoa. I had an experience like this when I was in Uganda last month. I got pretty sick for a couple days. Got salmonella is what they suggested. And so I'm on my way to the hospital one day because they said, "Phil, you look like death. We're going to send you to the hospital." So I drove an hour and a half into the hospital. On the way there, I'm starting to feel faint. And it's what I do. When I get sick, my blood pressure drops and I will pass out on you. I've done it many times before. Ask my family, we'll tell you stories about when I passed out during a haircut. Or on the bench in Starbucks, or in science class, or on a plane in Paris. I got stories, I'll tell you. And so now I have passed out in 5 countries on 3 continents. I fancy myself a pretty accomplished guy. And so here I am, I'm in the passenger seat of this van, and it's backwards there. So Vincent is driving over to my right. Awesome guy, one of our Ugandan friends, great laugh. And so he's driving me into the hospital, right? True story, right? He's awesome. And so here we are, we're driving in, and I'm starting to feel it coming. And I said, "Vincent, I'm gonna pass out." He said, "Should I pull to the side?" I said, "Yes." And that's the last I remembered. And then I went blank. And next thing I know, I'm like slumped over this way, and I hear him yelling my name over here. I don't know how long I was out. He said a minute or two, and I kind of come up, kind of groggy. I'm like, "Hey." I'm good. And so we go from there, we make it to the hospital, and I survived. And in that moment, what I didn't know was how much it freaked Vincent out. But not just that, but until later that night, he tells me the story. He says, "Yeah, I pulled to the side of the road where they sell sand. And where they sell sand there, these men came to the window to sell me sand. And I see them, and I'm thinking, oh, they're going to help us out." I don't remember any of this. I was out. And so he's thinking, here's going to get help for Phil, who's totally passed out next to him, right? That was a pitiful case. And these men come to the window to sell sand, and he's thinking he's going to get help. And they see me, the Mzungu, the white guy. And they see him unconscious. Who knows? Maybe he's dead. Who knows what happened in this van, right? And they turn around and ran. No joke. True story. They ran away. Not walked, they ran. Now, I wonder if that's a bit of what the priest and Levite were feeling. When they come across this scene that they can't understand, with somebody that looks different from them, with centuries of hatred and misconception and misunderstanding between them. And they see someone there needing help, but they can't enter into it. They turn and they run. I mean, these are the religious do-gooders of the day. These are the ones you expect to be the heroes, and yet they run away. And a Samaritan is the hero? There's no way. Did you catch, even in verse 36, when Jesus asks him a question, he says, "Who of these 3 passers-by would you say was a neighbor?" And the lawyer can't even bring himself to use the word. He can't even call him by name. He says, "The one who was merciful. You can almost hear the disdain. You can hear the misunderstanding in his voice. He can't even bring himself to say it was the Samaritan because there's such a disconnect, so much distance between the two. Don't miss the shock value of what Jesus is saying here. This is a shocking story. It's a hard teaching to say you go and love those you're like least or least like or like the least. That's a hard teaching. And then he says, go and do likewise. Go and follow the example of this guy that you hate. Whew. That's a hard teaching. And I'm thinking, because it's such a hard teaching, that's probably why interpretation got so cloudy over the centuries. You see, there's really two main ways that you can interpret this parable. Number one is allegory. As allegory, if you're in English class, you know that allegory, as you read into it, you see different symbolic meanings or undertones in every element of the story. That's an allegory, right? And the second way that you can read this is as an example to follow, and I think that's the true way to read it. But over the centuries, it was very popular to read it as allegory. Many would read into it different pieces. Even the church father Augustine read this parable as allegory. He saw the traveler who went down to Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to Jericho. He thought he was Adam, symbolized Adam. The robbers were the devil and his angels. The priests and Levite were the priesthood and ministry of the Old Testament, which couldn't save him. So here comes the Good Samaritan. That's Jesus Christ. And the Good Samaritan, Jesus Christ, binds the traveler's wounds, and that was restraining sin. And the inn was the church, the innkeeper, the Apostle Paul, and the 2 denarii that he paid. Well, that's his 2 commands, to love God and love others. Now, it doesn't take a genius to look at this. And don't get me wrong, Augustine was a brilliant man, wrote a lot of great things, but you hear that, and you just got to automatically assume or think to yourself, that's reading a lot into the text. Are you with me? If you read it as allegory, if you approach the parables as allegory, you're going to be constantly looking at all the minor points and trying to understand all of those, and you're going to miss the big picture. But Jesus wants us to get the big picture. He says here, this is an example to follow. He even says, go and do likewise. Go, follow this example. He wants us to live this out, to love those we're least like or like the least. Now, if you struggle to understand the parables, here's what I want you to grasp. As you read these parables, as you study God's word on your own, and you read these parables and you encounter some tricky teachings, I want you to realize they might have some hidden meaning. There might be some of that, but you don't have to read into every element. Really, 9 times out of 10, the bulk of Jesus' parables teach one lesson. He uses them much in the same way that Pastor Scott or myself will use an illustration to make one truth known, to bring something abstract, to make it more concrete. That's how he uses these parables. And so here's Jesus' major point. Here's his big idea, okay? And you have it on your sermon notes. Your love for God should be worked out in loving those you are least like or like the least. Your love for God should be worked out, say it with me, in loving those you're least or like the... That's his main point. That's what he wants us to grasp. Ultimately, he's saying God's love for you should flow through you into the lives of others beyond your comfort zone. So what's this look like? Well, he gives us the example of the Good Samaritan. This Samaritan here, he says he took pity on him. He had compassion on him. And one commentator puts it this way. I love his definition of compassion. He says, compassion is that which causes us to identify with another situation such that we're prepared to act for his or her benefit. In essence, he's saying compassion is made up of seeing and then acting. It starts with seeing the other person. It starts with opening your eyes to the needs around you. Now, as I was studying this passage, what jumped off the page to me is that all 3 of these passers-by saw the man. They can't claim they didn't see him. All 3 were explicitly told they saw the man. But what did they do with that? But that's where it starts. It starts with seeing. You look past all of the struggle and you see a person. Not skin tone, not struggle, not sin struggle, not socioeconomic status, not lifestyle choices, not gender, not sexuality, not politics or party or ethnicity or religion, not life circumstance, not marital status, not everything you're tempted to disagree on. Just look and see a person. Now I wonder, which one of these things pricked you a little bit? What prejudice was hiding beneath the surface in your life that you were tempted to overlook all this time, but it was brought to the surface as I mentioned something and you became automatically uncomfortable with that idea? Who are you having a difficult time with? Who do you not understand or even want to understand? Who do you struggle to love or to like around you? Maybe it's a particular person who has hurt you, or maybe that person has colored that whole impression of that race or that culture, or people like that. Who is it that you have a hard time with? Be honest. It starts by looking past all of this to see a person past race, past religion, politics, gay or straight, rich or poor, past whatever they've done to you. To see a person who God created in his image, a person for whom Jesus Christ died. You know, we get so stuck on these superficial divisions, and we forget that the gospel strips away all these barriers. Paul writes in Galatians that there is now neither Jew nor Gentile. I think you can add there, no Samaritan either. No black, no white, no slave, no free, no male or female, for we are all made one in Jesus Christ. You just start by seeing a person created in the image of God who Christ loves enough to die for him. That's where it begins. But you see, seeing isn't enough. Remember, we said all three people saw this man, but only one acted on it. It reminds me, a couple months ago, I was driving down out of my neighborhood, and I flipped a U-turn on Elk Grove Florin Road, and over to the right in the grass, I see a man laying there unconscious, really awkwardly laying there, and his hair is disheveled, his clothes are a mess, he's dirty. I'm wondering if he's strung out and laid down there, or if he got jumped and left there. These are the theories going through my mind. And I don't know if it was out of anxiety or fear or inconvenience. I kept on driving until I realized that I'd just been asked to preach on the Good Samaritan. It's okay, that's laughable. I don't know if it was guilt or if it was God speaking to me, but I stopped the car and I pulled back. And I hopped out and I went over to him and kind of asked, you okay? It took a couple times for him to wake up from his slumber, and he gave me a groggy, yeah, I'm all right. I said, do you need anything? He said, no, I'm okay. And there's not much more to the story. But I realized that I had to act on what I'd seen. That I had to do something, even if it's as simple, as small as stopping the car, pulling over and saying, are you okay? God bless you. Even that simple, I had to act on what I'd seen. Now, if I'm honest with you, there's probably a whole lot more times where I don't do anything than when I actually do. And maybe there's moments where that's okay. Maybe giving money to that homeless person isn't the best thing you could do for them at that moment. But if we're honest, if I'm honest, a lot of times I hold back more so out of inconvenience or out of guilt or shame or fear or anxiety, you name it. But something holds me back. We justify ourselves. I justify myself all the time. When I see a need or I see somebody that I struggle with, I justify it and I say, well, they deserve what they're getting, or they don't seem that interested, or whatever. You come up with name your excuse, and we have all our excuses. We justify ourselves all the time. Just like the Levite and the priest. You see, the temptation for us is not that we're going to go and beat on somebody who we have a prejudice against, like the robber. We're too good for that. We're church people, right? We don't do that. No, the temptation for us in our prejudices is that we're going to see that person as less than a person, as somebody we don't have to treat neighborly, somebody we don't have to love, and we justify ourselves just like the priest and the Levite, and we walk on by. What would it be like if we actually loved like Jesus loved? He gives us an example. He says, listen, you got to see those who are struggling like the Samaritan saw him. He came close. He picked him up. He cared for him. It cost him something. Did you notice that? You can't love from a distance. You can't show compassion just from a distance. It costs you something, just like it costs him something. You think sending $30 overseas for an orphan is doing your duty. No, he calls you to love those who are close to you that you don't like. It costs us something when we love. That's what compassion looks like. That's what love does. It sees and it acts. And he says, go and do likewise. I mean, just dream with me for a second here. What would it be like if we actually went and did likewise? What would it be like if the people of God actually loved like this? What if in a world where the racial divide continues to grow, where we have words in our vocabulary like Ferguson or South Carolina this year that continue to dredge this up. What if in a world like that, we could love people regardless of their skin color, regardless of the culture they come from, regardless of what language they speak? What if we could love like that? What if in a culture that muzzles what I believe is God's clear teaching about marriage or sexuality, that you could enter into dialogue graciously but boldly? What if you could meet up with a friend who's gay or lesbian and just spend time with them, even if you disagree on that point? I did this a few weeks ago. I was with a friend of mine, and we had a great lunch, and he couldn't remember if he'd come out to me or not. And I said, oh yeah, we talked in the fall. It doesn't change anything of how I see you as a person. You're still a person who's created in the image of God, who is loved by him, who Jesus Christ died for. Do we disagree? Yes. Do we talk about that? Yes. And we do it graciously. We do it lovingly. And at the end of the conversation, we give a big old hug. And it's good to spend time with them. Can we love people like that? I think it's possible. What if in our world, in our disconnected suburbia, you walked around and intentionally talked to your neighbors? Especially that one you don't like. We've all got one, right? I'm probably that one. What if you went around to your neighbors and just talked to them or said, hey, I was praying for you today. Hey, here's some fruit from my tree, whatever it takes just to show Jesus' love, especially if you don't like him. What if we were more aware of not just what we say to people who are different from us, but how we say it? What if instead of sneaking into church Sunday in and Sunday out, trying not to be seen or plug in, what if we gave ourselves to this experiment of a life group for the fall, knowing that we might be in there with people who we may or may not know or may not like entirely, who may not entirely be like us. Maybe they're going to be a different generation or a different race or a different whatever. What if you chose to believe that maybe God has something to give you through that? What if you chose to believe that God had something to give through you to somebody else in that? What would it look like if we actually loved like this? Man, I just got a feeling that this world would be a different place. Your neighborhood would be a different place. What if we loved like this hated half-breed Samaritan? So let's bring it home a bit. Who is it that you find difficult? What prejudices do you see surfacing in your life even as we talk? Be honest with yourself. Who was it that you heard me refer to a minute ago and you said anything but that? Anyone but them. I want you to take a minute, and on your outline, I want you to write down, I have a difficult time loving blank. Maybe it's a particular person that has hurt you or wronged you, and you have a hard time loving them. Maybe it's a race. Maybe it's an identification. Maybe it's a lifestyle. Maybe it's something broader that you just don't like people like that. I want to say what God's word says is you got to deal with that. Because he says you got to love those you're least like and like the least. That's God's word. So take a moment And just jot down something that you are going to do practically, tangibly this week. Maybe it's that coworker of yours who you don't agree with, and you're going to take them to lunch. Maybe it's a neighbor you're going to pay a visit to later today. Take a moment, write it down. As you're writing, I'm just praying, God, reveal in us what you want to deal with. Because you see, your love for God is lived out when you love others that you're least like or like the least. And you don't do this because it's noble. You don't do this because it's a good idea. You don't do this even ultimately because God told you to. You do this ultimately because you're following God's example. We're told in Romans 5:8 that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. But you know what it says right before that? It says, but God demonstrates his own what? Love for us in this. That while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That while we were still hostile toward God, when we wanted nothing to do with him, when we were shoving him away in our lives, he came. That blows my mind. That I could so set myself up against God, yet he still acts in love. He still comes close. If you don't have a saving relationship with this Jesus today, I challenge you, come up, chat with me. Talk to one of our leaders who are going to be up front here later. We would love to help you process any questions you have or explore who this Jesus is and what he offers you. He offers you life. And for all of us, may we go this week and show God's love to everyone we encounter, especially those that we aren't very much alike, where we are different, especially those where we have a hard time with them. That's my prayer for you. As the ushers come forward for the offering, we're going to close up in prayer. I invite you, God, to just speak into our hearts and our lives right now. God, when the sermon's over, I ask, Holy Spirit, that you'd keep preaching. That you would keep convicting our souls, our spirits of what we need to hear from you because you want to make us more like you, God.